If you're a developer looking for a cost-effective way of managing your containerized proof of concept or side projects, this series might be for you. Hello, here in Papa Spot, I'm George. Welcome to this series on setting up infrastructure to manage containerized web applications for proof of concept or side projects. On this episode, we will look into a cost-effective baseline infrastructure that you can use to deploy your containerized web applications for, say, a proof of concept or side projects. So, let's start coding. But before we do that, thanks to the amazing sponsor of this video, UpCloud. If you're in the lookout for a high-performance cloud solution, UpCloud can get you sorted. With a user-friendly, easy-to-navigate platform, transparent pricing, and responsive customer support to pride for, UpCloud can bring ease and reliability in your cloud journey. If you need database servers, infrastructure for your Kubernetes clusters, private network solutions, or cost-effective and developer-friendly server instances, check out UpCloud. With my promo code, you can get an extended 30-day trial and $50 credit when you sign up. The link is available at the top of the description below. The first thing that we need to do is build our infrastructure instance that will house all our projects and render access to the internet. The workspace that I have loaded on my cursor session is called My Docker Infrastructure. And what I will do is I will set this up as a local Git repository. So let's open a terminal session and then run git init. And then I am going to push whatever local changes I have so far. On the episode on simplifying Docker orchestration to the cloud with Docker Compose, which you can access right here, I have set up an UpCloud instance using OpenTofu. And without having to reinvent the wheel, I am reusing the same set of infrastructure code, which is what I have inside the infra directory right here. Later, I will make some modifications to cater for today's use case. And so if you need to see how I came up with this code, check out that video as a reference. Before I start making the updates to my infrastructure code, let's create a GitHub repository for the work we will be doing today. So let's switch to my browser, go to GitHub. If you are following through and doing exactly what I'm doing, make sure you have a GitHub account and you can connect to it successfully. I'm using GitHub because I will be using GitHub Actions to set up my continuous integration, so more on this later. Now on my GitHub account, I am going to create a new repository that will house my infrastructure code. I am going to call this My Docker Infrastructure, which is exactly the same name that I've set on my cursor workspace. Then I'm going to go ahead and create a repository. On this page, I am going to scroll on the section on pushing existing repository, which is right here. So I'm going to copy the whole code block and then switch back to my cursor session and paste the command. So now that my local repository has been synced, let's switch back to my browser and verify that my remote repository is updated. So let's go ahead and refresh this page. And all my local changes are reflecting in there. Now let's go back to my cursor session. So now that I have a remote repository to push my changes to, let's continue with the rest of the changes. At the root of my repository, I will create my main compose file. So let's close our terminal session. And the first important service that I need to add to my compose file is Dozzle, which I will use to set some observability for my containers. So this Dozzle setup should allow me to monitor my containers without having to connect to my container instance later on. The next service that I need to set up is a way to proxy inbound requests to the different web application side projects or proof of concept projects. In today's episode, I will use Caddy to set up my proxy service. So that's the basic container service setup that I need for my Caddy. But in order for this service to work, I need to customize its configuration file. So in the root of my local repository, I will create a new file called Caddy file. I'm going to make this base configuration file as clean as possible. What I have here is a routing directive to my Dozzle service, which for now, I have set it up to be accessible via port 8080. Because I'm allowing Caddy to open up port 8080, I need this port exposed in my Docker Compose file so it becomes accessible from the internet. So let's go and open my compose.yaml file. And on the exposed ports, I'm going to add port 8080. Now let's head back to my Caddy configuration file. The last line in this file, which is right here, allows me to create bespoke Caddy configurations that I will need when I start adding side projects or proof of concept projects into the container stack. I want these configuration files to be part of my repository, and so I will create a path in the root of my repository where I will store all of these configuration files. So now that I have a baseline Caddy configuration file and a directory for all other configurations, I need to update my Caddy service to consume this file and the directory. So let's go ahead and open our compose.yaml. And then I will add volume mappings to mount both my baseline Caddy config and the path to all the other configuration files for my Caddy service. So these are the bare minimum supporting components that I need to host container projects on the cloud instance. So let me commit all my changes at this point. Now, let's start looking at the updates that I need for my infrastructure code. So let's go and open my main.tf inside the infra directory and head to the inline section on the app cloud instance, which is right here. And what I need is update the GitHub repository that I'm cloning into the script. I also need to sync up my Terraform data block, which is right here. And then on the inline section, I will change the directory that this command will cd to. So instead of nginx node redis, I will also need to enrich the command that I'm going to run. So what I will do is break this long command string into separate readable items. And then I am going to enrich my Docker Compose command to add force recreate and remove orphans, just to make sure that the automation forces container recreation as well as cleanup. Okay, now let's commit my changes. The next piece that I need to work on is the CI/CD component, or the continuous integration and deployment, to make sure that my changes are deployed automatically to the intended destination. And I am going to use GitHub Actions for this. And to start, I will create a directory in the root of my repository that will contain all the GitHub Actions related files. This new directory will contain the pipeline configuration that I need to define the process of deployment. And inside this workflows directory, I will create my YAML file. This YAML file needs a name, and it also needs a directive on how the deployment is triggered. This directive indicates that any commits made to the main branch will trigger the deployment, which is my intention. And then I need to define jobs inside this pipeline. I only need one job, which will deploy the infrastructure to the UpCloud instance. And I'm going to call this deploy. Inside the deploy job, I will define the agent where my job will run in. And then I will start fleshing out the steps involved in the deployment. I will start with the checkout step, which will check out the repository that's going to be used for the deployment. And to be able to use OpenTofu to plan and apply my infrastructure changes, I will add another step to enable the OpenTofu library. And then I need to set up the different steps to initialize, validate, plan, and apply my infrastructure changes. When I run both Tofu Plan and Tofu Apply, the process will attempt to talk to UpCloud. And for this to work, I need to make sure that the proper authorization is in place to allow GitHub Actions to talk to my UpCloud account. And so in both Tofu Plan and Apply steps, I need to add the necessary environment variables that contain my UpCloud API credentials. With this setup, I am trying to pull out the values from GitHub secrets for the repository that I'm running on. So let's set this up. Let's switch to my browser. And then on this repository, I will go to settings and head to the secrets and variables section on this page. And then select actions. And then scroll down into the secrets section. And then under repository secrets, I'm going to add all the secret environment variables that I need. So now that I have added my UpCloud credentials in my GitHub secrets, let's switch back to my cursor session. And then we can start committing these changes and push them all to the remote repository. Remember that I just pushed changes into the main branch, which means my GitHub deployment pipeline should have kicked off. So let's switch to my browser. And let's scroll to the top of this page and then click Actions right here. My workflow actually failed, but before we investigate what caused the issue, let's quickly look into the components of my workflow setup. So under all workflows right here is the workflow that I created with the pipeline name matching with what I set up. And we have the main pipeline run on the right panel, which is showing a failed state. So let's go ahead and click this. On the left section of the page are the jobs that I've set up in my pipeline right here. This shows the single deploy job that I have set up. And then on the right panel, if I scroll a little bit, this shows a visual representation of the pipeline. Because I only have one job, this is actually not much useful. However, if I go ahead and click on this box right here that says deploy, this will now render the different steps configured in the job as well as the logs for each step. Now, let's investigate what caused the error. So if we have a look at the failed step, it says it failed on OpenTofu prep, and the error is complaining about a command not found. And I think this is because I'm using the incorrect command reference. So let's head back to my cursor session to fix this. And the fix for this is instead of using OpenTofu, the right way of running OpenTofu commands is just plain tofu. So let's go ahead and fix that. And then commit and push my changes. Now let's switch back to my browser and head back to the main workflow section. And my workflow still failed. So let's go ahead and investigate what the problem is. And it failed on the tofu plan. And it's complaining about missing configuration files, which means the tofu plan is actually reading from a directory that doesn't have Terraform files. So let's go ahead and fix this. Switch back to my cursor session. What I need to be mindful of is that my Terraform files sit in a directory called infra, which as you can see is right here. So on my pipeline, I need to add an extra command to cd into the proper directory before running my tofu commands. Save my changes, and then commit and push my changes. Now let's switch back to my browser and head back to the main workflow section of the page. And my deployment still failed. So let's have a look at what's causing this error. The failure this time is caused by the inner workings of my Terraform code. Remember that when I set up the remote execution provisioner, I am loading up SSH keys to gain access to the UpCloud instance and do my automated deployment. So I need to be able to replicate this inside my GitHub actions. So the first thing that I will need to do is head to the settings of this repository and then add the secrets for my SSH key files. So now that my UpCloud SSH key files are set up, let's switch back to my cursor session and add the necessary steps to consume these SSH files. So what I will do is add a new step to load my SSH key files before running my tofu commands. Now, let me go ahead and commit and push my changes. Switch to my browser and then head to actions. All we need to do now is wait for the process to complete. So if I want to watch the logs as they go through, I'm going to click this, click on deploy, and watch the process come through. My deployment workflow has finally completed successfully. So what I need to do now is pull out the server details on my apply output and test the access to my container stack. So let's expand the output of the apply step and then head all the way to the end of this log. My infrastructure code still needs to be updated to line up my changes because this output is still saying Nginx endpoint. So I can make the cleanup later. But what I have to do is copy this basic URL right here and then open a new tab. And I will attempt to access my Dozzle service. So let's change the port to 8080. And as I expect, I can see the infrastructure details relevant to all the containers running in my UpCloud instance. I've got my Caddy service right here. And I also have my Dozzle details right here. And that's all I have for today. On the next episode, we will look into how we can use this as a baseline setup to start deploying your containerized web applications or side projects. In the meantime, let me know your thoughts in the comments below and send me some likes if you find this useful. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you like the content on this channel. Until next time, keep learning and stay safe. See ya.